Do you have a litho stone, but not enough space for a litho press? Or maybe you just want to take your lithography on the go? Well, boy do I have the project for you. I've been working for months to try and get this project to be about as cheap as possible and to require the least amount of skills. You mostly just need some woodworking skills and some woodworking tools, and the whole thing can be built for under 200 bucks, not including, buying power tools and extra stuff like that. Let's get into it. First and foremost, here's the supply list. Here's how much I paid for everything, and I'll leave links down below to where I got them, but of course you probably might not have these stores around you. You just have to find something equivalent. And there are some extra things. I'm putting here some wood screws. I used a dowel jig because I wanted to be extra and have seamless woodworking, but it was my first time using a dowel jig, and honestly I think it made it worse. So I'm just going to recommend you all to use some screws. So yeah, the idea for this press actually started a long time ago, back in like 2015. I was talking to my print professor Jim Jarrett back at Truman State University, and he was telling me about this old prototype litho press that they was in a suitcase and was portable, all that stuff, and then you'd crank and the scraper bar moved instead of the press bed, and I thought that was cool. And the only thing I've ever been able to find about that was this dusty old image that I found on Pinterest. And if you ever looked anything up and found it to be on Pinterest, that there's no information attached to it. So I had to reverse engineer this. And I can see that it's a box, and it probably closes, and these are probably some latches. You latch it shut, and that creates the pressure. And then I can see that there is a hand crank on a corkscrew here, and that's going to drive the scraper bar back and forth. And here it has a little automatic tympan, which I did try to replicate, but I did find that it would get in the way when you're trying to ink up your stone. And purely by coincidence, when my old print professor Michael Barnes was in Germany and he visited the Deutsche Museum, he snagged me these pictures of pretty much the exact same portable litho press, and so I got to see a little bit better overview. So let's start with the box. I'm going to take my 2 foot by 4 foot piece of plywood, by 3/4 inch thick, and I'm going to go ahead and cut this down into 2 11.5 by 18.5 boards, 4 11.5 by 4 inch boards, and 4 20 inch by 4 inch boards. And the excess we're going to cut down into scraper bars. I'm including a little diagram on how exactly you can split a 2 foot by 4 foot piece of plywood to make this litho box. I wanted this litho box to use as little wood as possible but still fit a 1/4 sheet of paper or an 11 by 15. This diagram will also be available on my website to be downloaded as one really large PDF. Sorry my metric friends, I don't have an equivalent for you all. This entire build hinges around the vice screw that I have, and I don't have a metric equivalent for that vice screw. While we're at the table saw, we might as well cut the profile for our scraper bars, and so go ahead and angle your table saw. I'm using a 30-degree angle, but you can do that, or a 45, doesn't really matter. And we're going to cut it so that the edge of the scraper bar ends up being about 1/8 of an inch. Usually you would want 5/16 if you're making a normal scraper bar, but because our presses are underpowered, we're going to need less surface area to deliver adequate pressure. After our scraper bar stock has been cut, we can go ahead and trim it down to the sizes that we're going to print with. This is totally up to you and what sizes you usually print with. Usually you want a scraper bar that is as small as possible but still covers your image. That way you can get away with as little pressure as possible. My general recommendation is to make a 5-inch, 8-inch, and 10-inch scraper bar set. That way it'll cover most of your printing needs. Next up, we're going to drill a hole in our scraper bar. This is where the vice screw is going to kind of pass through it, and you're going to set it in the middle of the length of your scraper bar, and it's going to be 1 3/8 inch from the flat side, non-angled side of the scraper bar. While we're at the drill press, we might as well drill the hole where the vice screw passes through the box. And so we're going to take one of the shorter sides of wood, the 11.5 by 4 inch pieces of wood, and we're going to go ahead and take a pencil and mark down 2 3/8, and then we're going to go ahead and mark a center point, which should be around 5 3/4 of an inch, and just drill another 1.5 inch hole right there. And now at this stage, I would recommend taking one of your big pieces of wood and then cutting a window into it. I used a drill press to drill 2 holes on either side and then connected the holes with a jigsaw. I did this way too late in the process. It'd be a lot easier to do it now while it's still flat a piece of wood. To finish off the scraper bar, you're going to go ahead and grab yourself a strip of leather, a drill, and 2 screws, or 4. And we're going to roughly cut our strip of leather to be long enough to wrap around the kind of 3 edges of the scraper bar. It doesn't have to go all the way down the sides, so like 2 inches or so down the sides. Go ahead and drill a hole in each end of the leather strip, and then drill a hole in one side of the scraper bar for your pilot hole, and then go ahead and screw in your leather strip into one side of the hole. And don't screw it in all the way, you still want it to be a little bit loose. Next, you're going to take that rest of the leather strip, pull it as tight as you can, and then wherever that second hole lands, you're going to go ahead and use your pencil to mark that spot. And then you can let go of the leather, and we're not going to drill where we left that mark, but we're going to drill maybe like 1/4 to 1/2 of an inch kind of farther away from that mark. Ignore the top hole. Go ahead and screw your leather strap into that hole that you just made that's farther away from your pencil mark. Don't make it too tight because you still need to wiggle it around. And now, it's going to take a bit of effort, but we're going to go ahead and stretch this leather bar up and over the edge of our scraper bar. And so doing it this way will make sure that it's kind of extra tight. You don't want a lot of slack on the leather part of your scraper bars. And then go ahead and tighten those screws down. Go ahead and give everything a light sanding if you need to. Now we can finally start getting around to assembling the press. I'm using woodworking dowels, but you can just drill pilot holes and use wood screws. And really, we're just building 2 boxes. Now grab your larger piece of wood that has the window in it, and we're going to attach the ends of our larger 11.5 by 18.5 pieces of wood to the faces of the shorter 11.5 by 4 inch pieces of wood. And so here I'm starting with the one that has the hole in it, and we're going to attach the side that has more space to the end of the larger one, if that makes sense. For the opposite wall of this box, I'm going to go ahead and pre-drill the holes where the bearing's going to sit. And so I didn't really have the best way to do this, but I went ahead and measured, made a mark 3/4 of an inch from the wall of this piece of wood, and then I kind of set my bearing on it, and I just kind of centered it between the 2 sides, and then 1/2 of it is touching the top of that 3/4 inch mark. I do want to take care and note that the little grease zerk on the bearing should be not on the 3/4 inch side mark. And from there, I'm just going to trace out the holes that I'm going to drill, and then drill them out with a 5/16 inch drill bit. I'm going to go ahead and attach the face of this board, the part where I measured out 3/4 of an inch, to the end of my larger piece of plywood. And we should get this nice looking little U-shaped thingy right here. Sweet. Now we just have to attach our longer strips of wood, the 20 inch by 4 inch ones, to the sides of these. And we're just going to go ahead and do that for both sides. Now that it's all together, I'm going to go ahead and slide my vice screw through the hole in the side and try to center it as best you can. I'm going to go ahead and mark where those mounting holes are going to be and drill them out with a 5/16 inch drill bit. For the scraper bar assembly, I'm going to go ahead and take the nut that came with the vice screw. I want to put it over the hole, and then I'm just going to center it as best I can since I know that hole is centered. And I'm just going to make sure that the hole of the nut is going to pass through the hole that I drilled in the scraper bar. And we drilled the hole in the scraper bar a little bit oversized, so you should have some wiggle room. Do take note that the nut that comes with the vice screw is not perfectly square, and those holes aren't perfectly in the same spot. So I would take a Sharpie and designate the side that's going to touch the top of your scraper bar, so you know that's how it fits on there. That'll come in handy when you're changing scraper bar sizes. And yeah, we're basically just going to use our wood screws and attach the nut of this to the scraper bar. Let's go ahead and put our fittings in. So I'm going to grab my 1/4 pronged T-nuts, and I'm going to hammer these with the base side on the outside of the box for the pillow block bearing mounting holes, and I'm going to hammer them on the inside of the box for the vice screw mounting holes. After that, you just have to build the second box, exact same way that we built the first one, except there's just no holes in this bottom half of the box. Easy peasy. At this point, I would fill any cracks with wood filler if you want to fill your cracks. I would definitely recommend it for the bottom half of the box since that will probably collect water while you're printing. As far as the finish goes, I wanted mine to be black and gold, and so I went ahead and stained the whole thing black with India ink and then applied a top coat of urethane just to seal it all from water, because this press will probably get wet with the sponging and the water and whatnot. Honestly, I kind of wish that I just left it the natural wood color because I kind of think that looked better. Now, to attach the hinge, I'm going to need you all to do as I say and not really what's going on the screen. Imagine this piece on the left is going to be the lid and the piece on the right is going to be the bottom. Where I have them flipped here, and that made a bigger deal than I thought I was going to make. Anyway, I'm going to take my hinge and I'm going to go ahead and center it along the edge of my lip, and I'm going to fold the hinge closed, and I'm going to kind of line that up with the hinge side flush with the edge of the lid. I'm going to go ahead and drill myself some pilot holes and then go ahead and screw it down nice and tight. For the other half of the lid, I'm going to go ahead and line it up as best as I can, and then I'm going to go ahead and tape it closed and as flush as possible, and then I'm going to go ahead and drill some more pilot holes and screw that down nice and tight, and that should give me a nice sturdy hinge. Next up, we're going to add our latch clamps, and I'm going to go ahead and mark 4 inches away from the edge, and I'm using 2 latch clamps because I was worried one wouldn't be enough. It might be a little wibbly wobbly, but it is entirely possible you could get away with just 1 clamp. Anyway, I'm just going to mark these holes, drill, and then I'm just going to go ahead and screw down these latches. As for the other half of the latches, I'm going to go ahead and measure a 1-inch line down from the bottom side of the box, and that's just going to line up with the bottom edge of these kind of like latch hooks. And so once that's marked out, I'm going to go ahead and screw them down. Next, let's go ahead and put in the scraper bar assembly. So we have our pillow block bearing, our vice screw, and our scraper bar. And we're going to need our 1/4-20 machine screws. And I'm going to go ahead and screw on the scraper bar assembly. And don't do it how I'm doing it here, but do it so that the nut faces the opposite direction. That'll give you more center space to crank back and forth. And once you've gotten it about halfway through, we're going to go ahead and slide the end of it onto the pillow block bearing, and then we're going to slide the whole thing forward and then start screwing things down. You'll want to start screwing the vice screw mounting screws first, and then you'll screw in the pillow block screws afterwards. For some reason it's a lot harder if you screw the pillow block into the wall first and then try to line up the vice screw. Not quite sure, but yeah, this is the easiest way to do it. This next part was mostly cosmetic, but I went ahead and got some brass corner protectors, and I just kind of drilled some tiny little pilot holes and then nailed them in. And for convenience sake, I went ahead and added a carrying handle. This is actually a kayak handle, but I figured if it can carry a kayak, it could carry my 40-pound litho case. And so I could have just drilled it into the side of the wall. I didn't quite trust it. I'm just a little paranoid, and so I ended up drilling all the way through and adding some lock nuts on the other side, so it's just kind of like a sandwiched bolt rather than just a screw straight into wood. Lastly, we need a handle so we can crank that vice screw with a lot of power. And so here I bought a bunch of black pipe fittings, and I wanted to make a handle that didn't require welding, so I definitely could have made this for a lot cheaper and a lot faster if I could just weld a handle to it, but I know not everyone has access to welding, so this way, no welding required, and it just uses off-the-shelf parts, although it is a bit more expensive than just making your own handle. We're basically just going to assemble it, and it's going to be a handle that you can attach and detach whenever you want to put this thing away for storage. And so basically we're going to go ahead and hook up all of these parts into an L and leave off this little bit of end cap, and then whenever we're ready to print, we can go ahead and slide this little exposed bit in here and tighten the end cap, and tighten it real tight, and it'll clamp it so that the L part kind of faces outward. And we're done. We could just take off the cap and store the handle inside the box for more space. I did end up getting some rubber feet for the bottom of this box because it kind of kept sliding around on me. Not necessary, but I think it helps. I did try to make the automatic tympan, and I kind of got it to work, but it keeps breaking on me. It's so flimsy, and when it's up, it kind of gets in the way of inking all the way across the stone, like my roller bumps into it, and so that's a work in progress. I don't know if I would recommend it right now. For your tympan, I'm using a sheet of Duralar. I find that thick plexiglass tympans kind of distribute the pressure too well, and I really kind of need all the pressure I can get for this underpowered press, so I just use a sheet of Duralar and some grease as my tympan. But the press is pretty much done at this point. I haven't talked much about what it's like using this press. The first annoyance is you have to shove some stuff underneath your stone to get it up to the right height, and so I shoved some pieces of wood under here to get it up to kind of the general height, and then you're going to fine tune the pressure by kind of loosening these knock nuts and lengthening or shortening these little latches. Not a huge deal if you're just using one stone, but if you have multiple sized stones, it can be a bit annoying to change it back and forth. The second annoying thing is that when you want to change your scraper bar size, you kind of have to twist it all the way to the end and then unscrew the vice screw handle and then just kind of take off the entire assembly, remove all the screws, and then screw the nut onto another scraper bar. If you're like me and mostly just print in one size, then actually it's not too big of a problem for you. My last annoyance is the cranking mechanism. Because this is a threaded rod and it has 3 threads per inch, it means I have to crank 3 times to move the scraper bar 1 inch. So if I have a 10-inch image, I have to crank that handle 30 times and then 30 times back, and that gets really tiring sometimes. But I don't think you get away with anything less than 3 threads per inch because it really needs that power. But all in all, those are some pretty small caveats for having, first of all, having a litho press under $200, and secondly, having a portable litho press that you can put away when you're not using it. That covers the basics on how to make this little litho box for yourself. I think in a different video, I'll cover on my tips and tricks for how to print with it. But for now, I think that's enough for this video. What am I going to do with my litho box, you ask? Well, I think I'm going to take it with me, travel around, visit my friends, and do some collaborative lithos with them. I think it'll be really fun to bring lithography to people in places where it was previously inaccessible. So, if you want to see some collaborative lithography, go ahead and subscribe. I'm sure I'll have some videos on it in the future. But until then, keep on printing. I'll see you next time.